Good morning to those of you who've joined us. Thank you so much for joining us today for this very important book talk. We are living in, very unprecedented times. We are faced with threats to our own existence, such as the pandemic, which some of us managed to survive while several of our close ones did not. And there are a variety of threats to the species around us. These threats are of our own making. We have managed to wipe out several species of animals and plants, and many more remain threatened with extinction all around us. Our food baskets have changed drastically from what our grandparents ate and what our parents enjoyed. Interestingly, the Intergovernmental Platform on Biodiversity and Ecosystem Services, in its unprecedented 2019 assessment, declared that we are going through one of the worst planetary scale extinctions. 1 million species are threatened with extinction due to us. Today, with the impacts of climate change and the non-committed biodiversity loss, has reached a point that some of us fear we have probably crossed the point of no return. Conflicts over land, natural resources, displacement due to endless and mindless development is increasing every day, even as massive populations suffer due to nutritional insecurity and diseases. The privatization of commons, particularly forests, grazing pastures, water bodies, and seeds, are adding these challenges. From being a society that collected, preserved, worshipped, and reused seeds for generations, handing them down from families across to the younger generations. Today, we are at the mercy of seed companies to procure seeds. And besides having to deal with lawsuits over infringement of seed company contracts and irreversible damage to the purity of seeds itself, both due to hybridization and genetic modification, and of course, the chemicalization, which is striking at the very core of our existence. Karine Peschard's talk on her book Seed Activism will help us understand who owns seeds, who accesses them, and how, who benefits and who loses. The talk will help us all rethink ownership of seeds and the paradigms in which they are currently made to sprout out of labs. The discussion will help understand the historical, ethical, sociocultural, environmental, political, and needless to state, the agendas of capitalist forces behind these paradigms. We are happy to have Karine with us to talk about her book. A book that is perfectly released at a time when governments from around the world are meeting in Montreal as part of the COP15 of CBD to develop a global compact for reversal of biodiversity loss by 2030. Extremely delighted to have you all with us and extremely happy to introduce Karine to all of you. Karine Peschard is an associate research fellow at the Geneva Academy, where she conducts research on the rights of peasants, in particular the right to seeds. She's also an associate professor associate researcher at the Albert Hirschman Center on Democracy, the Graduate Institute of International and Development Studies. Her expertise and publications relate to intellectual property regimes in agriculture, agrobiodiversity, legal activism, and seed sovereignty, with a regional focus in Brazil and India. And to respond to her book and also share from their own experiences, we have a list of very eminent speakers today, and happy to introduce all of them. We have Aruna Rodrigues, who is the lead petitioner in the Supreme Court of India, challenging the release of genetically modified organisms, particularly in food crops, on a variety of socioeconomic, environmental, and public health grounds. She has over 2 decades collated arguably the most authoritative evidence from around the world why GMO foods are unnecessary for India, and how they present a clear and a very present danger to food sovereignty itself and food security and the farmers' rights over seeds. Then we have Vandana Shiva, a world-renowned environmental thinker I don't have to introduce, but an activist, a feminist, a philosopher of science, a writer, and a science policy advocate, who is also the founder of Navdanya Research Foundation for Science, Technology, and Ecology, and President of Navdanya International. Trained as a physicist She shifted to interdisciplinary research in science, technology, and environmental policy. In 1982, she founded the Research Foundation for Science, Technology, and Ecology, an independent research institute that addresses the most significant problems of ecology of our times. And 2 years later, Navdanya, the seeds, the nine, what it means, 9 seeds, the movement in defense of biodiversity and small farmers. We are very happy to have Farida Akhter from Bangladesh with us today. She's the executive director of the organization UBINIG, the Policy Research for a Development Alternative, and organizer of Nayakrishi Andolon. She's the petitioner against the court case against the approval of BT Brinjal. She has done extensive field research on BT Brinjal before and after the approval for the field cultivation. She's a member of the Coalition Against GM Crops in Bangladesh. She has done research on the golden rice and other GM crops as well. The organization also runs the Community Seed Wealth Center, which has a collection of over 2,500 varieties of rice. And then we have Vivek Karyappa, who's a self-taught organic farmer who farms with his wife Julie and their sons in the Nugu Valley between Bandipur, Wayanad, and Nagarhole forest. He has been active in farmers' protests against GMO and is now working on tackling the spread of toxic herbicide-tolerant crops in eco-sensitive zones. He has recently authored the book On the Canvas of My Time, Our Search for Sustainability. We would urge all of you all to pick up a copy of that book as well. Then we have Aneel Hegde, who is a member of the Parliament, the Rajya Sabha. He has served on as the National General Secretary of the Samata Party and Janata Dal United when George Fernandes was its president. He has conserved and grown 134 varieties of paddy seeds in Udupi district. He coordinated in Kandla, Gujarat, a campaign against a project of US multinational Cargill Seeds, which resulted in the company's withdrawal. He has over decades worked with campaigns against the 1994 GATT Treaty, which laid the foundations for according patent rights to corporations overseas. His patriotism and struggle to farmers' rights has resulted in over 4,000 arrests and also serving time in Tihar jail with veteran trade unionist and former Defense Minister of India, late George Fernandes. So thank you everyone for joining us for this talk, and especially to all our speakers. So we will start with Karine talking about her book, following which Leo will share the little story of our BT Brinjal, PIL, and the NTC, which we were shuttling between the High Court of Karnataka to the National Green Tribunal and then the Supreme Court, which has now sent it back to the High Court of Karnataka. Then we will have Aruna respond and also talk about her anti-GMO PIL. Then we will have Vandana, followed by Farida, Vivek, and finally Anil. We hope to finish all the speakers' conversations by 7:15 so that we will get a little time with all our guests today for some interaction, question and answers. So, and hope to finish by 7:30. So over to you, Karine, and let us know if you have difficulty in your slide presentation.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Bhargavi, for the introduction. Let me first share my screen. Okay. Can you all see my screen now?
Yeah.
Yes? Okay, perfect. Okay, so thank you to the ESG team for organizing this book talk today. And I also want to thank all of the respondents for accepting the invitation and everyone who's here in attendance. I'm all the more happy to be here today that, as Bhargavi mentioned, there have been interesting developments in India lately regarding both BT Brinjal and GM mustard, and we'll hear about it more later. So the book is a legal ethnography, a comparative legal ethnography of court challenges to the private intellectual property, IP systems that have been implemented for biotech crops in Brazil and India. It was part of a broader, larger research project on legal activism around plant genetic resources that I conducted with Shalini Randeria. And the project was funded by the Swiss National Science Foundation, and it was based at the Graduate Institute in Geneva. So intellectual property and seeds, in particular, farmers' and peasants' right to seeds, have been at the center of my research for quite a few years now. I took the picture you see on the slide in the state of Paraná in southern Brazil back in 2004. At the time, I was doing an internship with a Brazilian NGO called Terra de Direitos, which means land of rights, to learn about agrarian issues in preparation for my PhD. And as part of the internship, I took part in this event. So it was the annual land pilgrimage organized by the Pastoral Land Commission of the Catholic Church. And the theme that year was, I believe in seeds, God's promised, our heritage. And that day, and I described this in the opening pages of the book, farmers bound by chains and bowed under the weight of heavy bags of seeds with the logo of the main seed companies at the time. So you can see BASF, Monsanto, DuPont, Bayer, AstraZeneca, which would become eventually Syngenta, marched before the silent crowd and then got rid of their chains and burdens and set them on fire. And this was then followed by a day-long celebration of harvest and seeds, which you can see on this slide. So fast forward 10 years, I was still researching these issues, no longer only in Brazil, but now also in India. And I started noticing that there were more and more legal challenges in the two countries involving biotech patents and royalties. And coming from Canada, where we had the famous or infamous patent infringement lawsuit opposing canola farmer Percy Schmeiser to Monsanto that went all the way to the Supreme Court, these cases really caught my attention. And by the way, the Supreme Court decision in this case was in 2004, the same year as the land pilgrimage in Brazil. And I became curious to find out how these court cases would be dealt with by the courts in these two countries, given that compared to the US and Canada, Brazil and India have different legislation, they have different legal cultures, and of course, they have also different agricultural systems and practices. So for one thing, seed saving is much more common in Brazil and India than it is in North America. And this not only among small farmers, but even among large soybean producers in Brazil, for example. And also the idea of patents on seeds is much more controversial. So in 2015, I was just starting to do research for this project. And some of you may remember that, but the Time of India broke the story that Monsanto had never held a patent on first generation BT cotton in India. Now, this is almost 15 years after the introduction of BT cotton in India. And I have to say, when I saw this, I was perplexed. How was this possible? So here's the story. According to the Times journalist, a farm activist who filed a right to information request about Monsanto's patent rights in India received contradicting answers from two different government bodies. The Central Institute for Cotton Research, the CICR, responded that Monsanto's BT gene had never been patented in India. However, the Ministry of the Environment said that the BT cotton developed by CICR using that same gene could not be put on the market because it would infringe on Monsanto's patent. So did Monsanto have a patent or not? It turns out that the CICR was right. Monsanto had never applied for a patent for first generation BT cotton in India. And I'll come back to this story later in the talk. But this controversy, it became known as the BT cotton trade fee dispute, was not originally part of the research project, but when it erupted into a full-blown controversy in late 2015, its relevance to the project and the parallels with the Roundup Ready soybean litigation in Brazil were too good to be ignored. So here are the case studies. The first one is a class action lawsuit against Monsanto's royalties on Roundup Ready soybean in Brazil. So these soybeans are genetically modified to resist direct applications of Monsanto's glyphosate-based Roundup herbicide. Now moving to India, the second case study is the legal dispute I just mentioned among Monsanto, the government, seed companies, and farmers concerning royalties and seed prices for BT cotton. And finally, also in India, the third case is the public interest lawsuit against the international public-private partnership that developed BT Brinjal in India. And both BT Brinjal and BT cotton contain Monsanto's BT gene for pest resistance. So as you may have noticed, the three case studies have something in common, which is that they all involve Monsanto, which has since been acquired by Bayer in 2018. Now, I have to say that the project was not originally meant to be about Monsanto, but this is not a coincidence either, because Monsanto has been the company most aggressively pursuing its IP rights worldwide, including in North America by hiring private detectives and by suing farmers, as we all know. And in fact, not only pursuing, but also designing and implementing new private intellectual property regimes. So the questions I set out to answer in the book concern the role of corporation, states, and litigants in the implementation and contestation of IP regimes in agriculture. First, what legal tactics have biotech corporations developed to assert IP rights in countries with stronger farmers' rights legislation and more limited IP protection? Second, what has been the role of the state in the implementation of IP regimes for biotech crops in these countries? And third, how are biotech patents and royalty collection system contested in the courts, by whom, on what grounds, and importantly, what have these lawsuits achieved? Now, in the limited time I have today, I cannot go into the details of the case studies. For that, you'll have to read the book. What I'll do is I'll just briefly outline the case studies so you have some background, and then I want to spend more time presenting some of the book's main conclusions and arguments. Okay, so the first case study is a class action lawsuit that was filed by a farmers union from the southern Brazilian state of Rio Grande do Sul back in 2009. This farmers union represents large soybean producers, but the State Federation of Agricultural Workers, which represents small farmers and family farmers, joined the action early on. Now, let me explain very briefly the royalty collection system that was implemented by Monsanto in Brazil. In order to prevent farmers from saving seeds for replanting, which is very easy with soybean because it's not a hybrid crop, Monsanto introduced a system that was unique at the time, in which it charged royalties on harvested soybean when a farmer could not prove that they had bought certified seeds at the beginning of the season. Now, this represents a major change because what it means in practice is that Monsanto's property rights extends to a farmer's harvest, to a farmer's production. Now, farmers in this lawsuit argued that this violated their right to freely save seeds for replanting, a right guaranteed to them by the Plant Variety Protection Act. In 2012, farmers won the first instance decision in what may be, to my knowledge, one of the first court victories against Monsanto in a case involving intellectual property. In his decision, the judge ruled that farmers have the right to save seeds for replanting without paying royalties, that small farmers also have the right to exchange or give away seeds among themselves, and that Monsanto could charge royalties on the licensing of its technology to seed producers and on the sale of seeds to farmers, which is conventional practice, but not on harvested soybean. Now, of course, Monsanto appealed that decision, and the farmers and won the appeal. And then the farmers union in turn appealed to the Superior Court of Justice that also ruled in favor of Monsanto in 2019. In this decision, the court's interpretation, which is similar to earlier decisions by the Supreme Courts of the US and Canada, is that farmers' rights to save seeds for replanting does not extend to plants that contained patented traits and genes. Okay, now the second case study is the dispute around the price of seeds and the rates of royalties for BT cotton. It involves Monsanto, the Indian seed companies that produce BT cotton seeds on behalf of Monsanto, the Indian government, and farmers' organizations. Now, the way it works in India is that Monsanto entered into sub-licensing agreements with Indian seed companies so that they produce cotton seeds containing Monsanto's BT genes for the Indian market. Now, this dispute is both about the rates of royalties that seed companies had to pay to Monsanto for the right to use the BT technology, but it's also about the price of seeds because, of course, what happens is that companies, they pass the cost of royalties on to farmers. Now, this dispute had been going on in various Indian states for about a decade. But following the election of the BJP in 2014, the central government intervened in the dispute in favor of seed companies and set the maximum retail price and rates of royalties for BT cotton, in practice significantly slashing both. Again, to my knowledge, this is the first instance of a government directly intervening to set the price of royalties and seeds for biotech crops, which, as you can imagine, did not go down well with Monsanto. Now, as part of this legal dispute, Monsanto filed multiple lawsuits in various states. One of these lawsuits was filed in the Delhi High Court against one of its sub-licensees, the seed company Nuzividu, for breach of contract and patent infringement. And that's where it gets interesting. So the lawsuit led the Delhi High Court to examine the legality of Monsanto's patents under Indian law. And in April 2018, in a decision that took everyone by surprise, including Monsanto itself, the Delhi High Court ruled that BT cotton seeds were not patentable in India, in effect revoking Monsanto's patent. In his decision, the judge ruled that the transfer of the BT trait to plant varieties through hybridization was an essentially biological process and therefore was not patentable under the Patents Act. He also ruled that the subject matter of the patent, a DNA sequence, did not qualify as a microorganism patentable under the Patents Act. He also wrote in the decision that use of the patented invention could not be construed or interpreted to include use of the plants and their offsprings, both of which are explicitly excluded from patentability under the Patents Act. And finally, the judge also pointed out that the Indian legislation guarantees substantive rights to farmers, in contrast to other countries like the US, and therefore that Indian courts should not rely on these court decisions abroad. Now, of course, Monsanto appealed the decision to the Supreme Court, which sent the case back to the Delhi High Court for re-examination. Now, what happened is that while the case was before the Delhi High Court, Bayer, which had acquired Monsanto in the meantime, announced in April 2021 that it had reached an out-of-court legal settlement with Nuzividu that would put an end to all ongoing litigation. Under the settlement, Monsanto and domestic seed companies agreed to fix royalties to between 5 and 20% of seed value. So to give you a sense, it was 75% in the early years that BT cotton was cultivated. Now, unfortunately, I think the settlement preempted the Delhi High Court and eventually the Supreme Court, because that case would have ended up before the Supreme Court, from ruling on the question of the patentability of plant-related inventions under Indian law. And this means that this will remain a gray area in India, at least for the time being. And now the third case study, BT Brinjal. So as you know, BT Brinjal has not been commercialized in India. It is the object of a national moratorium since 2010. So for over a decade now. Now, during the public consultation that led to that decision, ESG found out that local varieties of eggplant had been used to develop BT Brinjal without the authorization of national and state biodiversity authorities. Now, they approached the state and national authorities. The State Biodiversity Board was quite responsive to the complaint, but the NBA not so much. In response to the NGO complaint, to ESG's complaint, a high-ranking government official said, oh, you know, law is only an instrument. you know how things works in this country. There are so many laws which we don't apply. So to make a long story short, the lack of action on the part of NBA eventually led ESG to file a public interest lawsuit to bring attention to the issue, not only to the issue of BT Brinjal, but more broadly to the issue of lack of implementation of the Biodiversity Act, including the inclusion of threatened and endangered species in a list of normally traded commodities. Now, who are the developers of BT Brinjal? BT Brinjal was developed by the Agricultural Biotechnology Support Project, BSP, which is an international partnership of public and private institutions funded by USAID, so the US Agency for International Development, and based at Cornell University in the US. It included Monsanto, Indian government agencies, Indian public agricultural universities, and also Sadhguru, an Indian consultancy. Now, in this project, the role of public agricultural universities was to provide local varieties of eggplant in which Monsanto's BT trait would be introduced. But they did so without applying for permission from the biodiversity authorities and without the knowledge of the local communities who cultivate these varieties. Just to give you a sense of how unique some of these varieties are, I did some fieldwork around one of 16 local eggplant varieties that is the object of litigation. It is called Matugula. It is cultivated in a very specific ecosystem on the coast of Karnataka. So it's cultivated between two rivers and the ocean. And it is at the center of a centuries-old celebration at the local temple. In this case, local farmers only found out that Matugula had been used to develop BT Brinjal when they were asked to test BT Brinjal in their fields. And their response was to organize and apply for geographical indication status for the Matugula variety, which they obtained in 2011. Now, the public interest litigation put pressure on the government to bring criminal proceedings against those involved in this project and to suspend the patent application. In 2013, the High Court of Karnataka ruled in the criminal complaint that on the basis of primary evidence, it seemed that the developers of BT Brinjal had indeed violated the Biodiversity Act by failing to seek permission to access local eggplant varieties. However, the accused obtained a stay in the Supreme Court that has not been lifted to this day. So it has been in place for, I think, over 8 years now. As for the public interest litigation, it was transferred by the Karnataka High Court to the National Green Tribunal. Now, ESG challenged this decision on the grounds that the issue of normally traded commodities was a constitutional matter outside the purview of the National Green Tribunal. So this was in limbo, also in limbo for years, until the Supreme Court finally ruled just a couple of weeks ago in favor of ESG and sent the case back to the Karnataka High Court. Now, in spite of these judicial delays, the case has had a number of impacts. It has brought attention to the Biodiversity Act and the need to implement it. And more broadly, it has showed how difficult it is for public institutions to protect the public interest when they get involved in public-private partnership. Okay. So now that you have some background into the case studies, I'll present some of the main findings and conclusions. As I was writing this book, I read an article in The Guardian where a financial trader was quoted as saying, "We take advantage of the gray area between what we know we cannot do, and what we believe we can get away with." And when I read this, it really struck me as a perfect description of Monsanto's approach to intellectual property. As a spokesperson for Monsanto Canada said in 2001 during the patent infringement lawsuit against Percy Schmeiser, quote, "We did have a number of people waiting in the queue," that's farmers that can be sued, right? "But Canadian farmer Percy Schmeiser was the first case where we attempted to find out if the patent was valid. You don't know how strong that patent really is until somebody violates it and it's upheld in a court of law." Now, to get back to the quote by the financial trader, in the area of intellectual property and biotech seeds, the gray area was vast. Monsanto exploited it fully, and to be honest, it is quite incredible what it was able to get away with. So just to give two examples, between 2002 and 2006, the corporation charged an extremely high rate of royalties on Bollgard 1 BT cotton, first generation BT cotton, equivalent to 75% of the total price of seeds. So to give you a sense, royalties on conventional seeds are usually in the order of 10%. And remarkably, it did so despite the fact that it did not hold a patent in India. But that was only revealed much later, as we saw. In Brazil, Monsanto continued to charge royalties on Roundup Ready soybean for 2.5 years after its patent expired. And that was only revealed again as a result of the class action lawsuit. So there were a number of what I call enabling factors, for lack of a better expression. First, for about a decade after the introduction of GM crops, there were no legal challenges to test the validity of these patents and royalty collection systems. Second, there was a blatant lack of legal expertise in the area of intellectual property and agricultural biotechnology, which had only recently been introduced in both countries following the WTO TRIPS agreement. So this was totally new, and it is a very specialized and complex field of legal practice. Third, given the hype surrounding biotech crops in the early years, there was a real fear of missing out on the technology, and Monsanto clearly capitalized on that. And finally, Monsanto was able to co-opt some of the government regulatory agencies as well as some of the private actors, for example, in the soybean complex. And I'll come back to this in a moment. One argument I make in the book is that Monsanto devised private IP regimes that essentially rendered the Indian and Brazilian legislation moot. In fact, in what amounts to a form of IP imperialism, Monsanto seems to have operated on the principle that it should enjoy the same level of IP protection in Brazil or India than it did at home in the US, notwithstanding the fact that the Brazilian and Indian legislation differ significantly from that of the US. As Monsanto's Brazilian business manager admitted frankly at the time, that was early on, by virtue of the Plant Variety Protection Act, which guarantees to farmers the right to safe seeds, I believe we will be operating two systems in Brazil. One in which royalties are collected after the harvest in the case of illegal soy, and the other in which royalties are collected when the seeds are sold in the case of legalized planting. Now, this statement is a rare admission on the part of Monsanto that the Brazilian legislation does indeed guarantee the right to safe seeds for replanting. But at the same time as the business manager recognizes this right, he refers to these seeds as illegal and announces a charge that will infringe upon this right. Now, I want to come back to this story and to the article I showed at the beginning. The most convincing explanation for this was given to me by an activist I interviewed, who said, there was in the early years after Monsanto's entry into India, a tacit understanding that the government would recognize the corporation's IP rights granted in other jurisdictions, even in the absence of an Indian patent. Except that this is not how patent law works, right? Patents are granted on a national and at most regional basis, as is the case in Europe, for example, but there's no such thing as an international patent. Now, this tacit understanding and the activists' exact words were an unwritten etiquette meant that the government would recognize Monsanto's IP rights over BG1, even though it did not have a patent in India. According to the same activists, this stemmed in part from the government's desire to maintain good relations with the company because it saw access to the technology as being in the country's economic interest. So Monsanto did not apply for patent on first generation BT cotton cultivated between 2002 and 2006, but it did apply and obtain an Indian patent for second generation BT cotton. In May 2016, I met a prominent Indian activist, and when I asked her whether she believed Monsanto's patents were in conformity with the Indian legislation, she said, "To be honest, no one really knows. The problem is that these patents have never been tested in the courts, but who among us activists can afford to take on such a legal challenge?" And I wanted to mention this quote because I think it really underlines both the importance of these kinds of legal actions, as well as how challenging they are for civil society. And I think that several people who are here today can testify to that. Okay, now, and I will conclude with this. What have these lawsuits achieved? So as we saw, results in the courts have been mixed, but this is the nature of the judicial process, right? In the Roundup Ready soybean class action, the Farmers Union won in the first instance, but then went on to lose both appeals. In the BT cotton trade fee dispute, the out-of-court settlement between Bayer Monsanto and Nuzividu put an end to all ongoing litigation. And in the BT Brinjal public interest litigation, there was a favorable decision the pill was in limbo for several years, but has now been restored thanks to the recent decision of the Supreme Court. Now, it is important to recognize the significance of some of these decisions, even if they end up being overturned on appeal, because they create precedents and they open cracks in the dominant legal interpretations. One thing that is striking with these cases is that the higher up in the court system, the more is at stake and the more political pressure there is. A Brazilian lawyer told me once, no one bothers to buy a first instance judge, it's just not worth it. You've got plenty of time to reverse the decision. In the case of Roundup Ready soybean, I was in the Superior Court of Justice when the judge delivered the final decision, and he made a lengthy opening statement on the importance of soybean exports for the Brazilian economy. So we knew right away where this was heading, right? And it was clear how much these kinds of economic consideration had influenced the ruling. Now, when we look at litigation, it is important to also look beyond the courts. And beyond the courts, the lawsuits have had various impacts. First, they've spurred the development of IP expertise among farmers' organizations, lawyers, public servants, and judges, something that had been lacking 10 years earlier. Second, they shed light on the status of Monsanto's patents and in some cases raised questions regarding their validity. Third, they expose how the private IP mechanism implemented by the corporation for the collection of royalties subverted the domestic legislation on the protection of plant varieties and farmers' rights. And finally, they revealed how public-private partnership blurred the line between public research and commercial exploitation and between public and private interest. And most importantly, and I will conclude with this, litigation prompted Brazilian and Indian courts to examine the complex issues raised by the extension of patents rights to plant in the context of the country's own domestic laws. These issues include the patentability of gene, the relationship between patent law and plant breeders' rights, seed saving and the scope of biotech patents, and also the balance between private IP rights and the public interest. As a result, Brazilian and Indian courts have begun to develop legal interpretations that break with the dominant case law developed so far by the US and Canadian courts. And in some of the rulings, I've offered legal interpretation that balance patents against farmers' rights, food security, and the public interest. And I will leave you with this quote from the lawyer representing the Farmers Union in the Brazilian class action suit. One day he told me, you know, we might not win this time, but one day we will win. So thank you for your attention. And I really look forward to the comments and also the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Karine, for walking us through the 3 case studies and sharing your experience as an intern, as a PhD scholar, and the writing of the book, and your own insights on the seed companies and the outcomes that take place in the courts. So I think now is the right time to also understand what happened to the PIL that ESG filed way back in 2012. And I would invite Leo to share with us the experience over the last 10 years now. Over to you, Leo.
Thank you, Bhargavi, and thank you, Karine, because your explanation about the 3 case studies that you have so well researched and documented and also analyzed makes my task easier. I'd like to begin by saying that when I read your book, it was essentially a documentation of how regulatory systems across the world, which we have painfully built, are being dismantled, even scattered around. And this has been a struggle for quite a while. But it has been more of a struggle in the current times, especially in terms of how the governments are aligned with corporate interests. So whether it is patent rights or living forms, living resources, bioresources, and so on, or if it is an act of biopiracy, what we are finding is the state, which should be the one which acts as the custodian of sovereign bioresources of the people, is actually working sort of in favor of the corporations. And the corporations have no address. And this is actually a fact in Monsanto's case, at least. And I'll explain why they don't have an address a bit later. But firstly, I think to walk you quickly through what the issue was, you have explained, Karine, the illegal access of 16 varieties of brinjal or eggplant, as we call them outside India, by Monsanto, Myco, and the entire network of public universities, which was University of Agricultural Sciences in Dharwad, Tamil Nadu Agricultural University, and the Indian Institute of Vegetable Research in Varanasi, who basically handed out to Monsanto the varieties which they had collected from farmers and allowed that to be transformed into BT brinjal, which in 2009, the Genetic Appraisal Committee, Genetic Engineering Appraisal Committee, at that time it used to be called Genetic Engineering Approval Committee, actually approved the BT brinjal product for commercial release without even bothering to ask if the Biological Diversity Act was complied with. While that was one failure, and GAC is directly under the Ministry of Environment and Forests, there is a particular law called the Allocation of Business Rules of the central government, in which the Ministry of Environment is particularly held as the custodian in terms of protecting India's biodiversity. So whatever actions are taken by any of its committees, including the GAC, must be in conformity with all the laws that the ministry governs or administers. Obviously, GAC didn't care. The question was, what did the National Biodiversity Authority do? We find that, as you rightly quoted, I have no hesitation in saying where the quote came from. It came from the very top of the NBA. The man was chairing it that time. And it happened in a way that when Bhargavi called him to inquire, because we had discovered this act of biopiracy, and we wanted confirmation from NBA, he actually said that. He said, there are laws, but, this is India. Now, when you hear something like that, you worry because we know the history of Monsanto globally. There is no doubt in our minds that Monsanto is there to make profit. The fact that the USAID came with the Agricultural Biotechnology Support Program, if you look at the text of it, it's claimed to be pro-poor, but in fact it is pro-rich and it is pro-super rich, because those who hold stocks in Monsanto don't care about world hunger, food security, ecological security, or the future of our seeds. They just care about their, return on investments and how their stocks are doing. So, driven by that kind of a assemblage of interests, what Monsanto does is not necessarily come to other countries and say, what, we are there to help you, because you can see even in the way in which Twitter is being played around in terms of money, how even such a, we can live without Twitter, but we can't live without food, right? But yet the way in which market capitalization of such assets produce wealth for corporations can be appreciated. And we have always asked, why did Monsanto even bother to come and look at brinjal? Because we find brinjal everywhere. Hundreds and thousands of varieties are there across South Asia. And we have never struggled to, grow brinjal. In fact, we have always found that brinjal gets infected by one little worm here and something else there, but it's really no big deal. We just cut that part of it and cook the rest of the brinjal. So that's what the world does. So why brinjal, right? And that's when we realize that, it is because of its market share. I mean, it's about 30% of the vegetable that is consumed in India is brinjal, and almost everybody consumes it. And therefore, if you actually take control of brinjal and the fact that it then as a commodity and as a proprietary product, the seeds are then locked, given the first case study that you explained in what's happened with Brazil. If that could happen with brinjal, I mean, it's roaring profits forever because people won't stop consuming brinjal. But the question is, it is also one of the most accessible vegetables. It is nutritious. It is also used in Ayurveda. And it is also the fact that it is affordable by everybody. So imagine what would have happened if Monsanto got control of that, and through a network of public universities which are publicly funded and which are supposed to protect public welfare, actually handed out farmer varieties without consent. And so that way it constituted a patent violation of Section 3 and 4 of the Biological Diversity Act, which the National Biodiversity Authority should have been, as the custodian, in the forefront, asking questions, especially because 2009 and 2010, there's uproar around the country. And we don't find the NBA even bothering to, inquire. So to cut a long story short, we went into deeper investigations and we found that not only did they not seek permissions, but they were glum with the sort of confidence, which we later find in one of their pleadings in the criminal lawsuit. They said, why should we take? I mean, this was given to us from public university, so it's public, right? So you see that's when you realize the entire infrastructure that we have built from 1992, the Convention on Biological Diversity, making sure that the bioresources of the people, and it is not the bioresources of the state. State is merely a custodian. The state is required to step in and stop biopiracy. And we find that the state colossally failed. And when I say the state, it also means the so-called autonomous wing of the state, which is the Biodiversity Authority. So thankfully for us, there are always some officers who find it in them to inquire. We found one Prajapati, we found another Sugara, who took up our cause and inquired and established beyond any reasonable doubt that in fact the access was illegal. So National Biodiversity Authority deterred substantially, despite the parliament actually being told by, following Jairam Ramesh, we had Jayanti Natarajan, that there would be legal action against Monsanto and everyone else involved. But the deterring is indicative of the way in which the NBA is set up. If you look at the board of NBA, it has 15 members. 10 of them are appointed by the government of India. And all 10 of them represent some of the key departments which protect corporate interests today. Even then. And so you will always find that if something goes into the NBA about a dispute goes into the NBA, it is more likely than not, it goes in favor of the corporate sector or what the state supports. And in this case, the ABSP project was a private-public partnership, as you put it, between two governments also, and it almost went in their favor. But because there was a casting vote, I think Dr. Pisupati was there at that time as the chairman, following Dr. Gautam, and he actually cast his vote to prosecute. But the question really is, was that necessary? Because the parliament had already been told legal action would follow. But this compelled them to file the criminal lawsuit in Dharwad court, which was immediately appealed in the High Court, and the stay was denied. And I would welcome all of you, and we'll also share the link to read Justice Pachpure's order, which goes into all the nuances of what constitutes biopiracy, the nature of the law. And then he says why he dismisses the appeal of the accused in terms of the charges they were, because these are serious charges. And as you are well aware, environmental law in India is based on criminal jurisprudence. So environmental violations are not mere civil violations, they're also criminal violations. And the charges are, the punishment is very, very stringent in this case. Our PIL was filed to draw the attention of the court to force NBA to file the criminal lawsuit, which happened. So part of the success was already secured in 2012. But quite unfortunately, the case, our case was transferred to National Green Tribunal. And the tribunal could not hear our PIL because part of the PIL was also a challenge to Section 40 of the Biological Diversity Act. Now, if you read the text of the act, it basically says if the Ministry of Environment and Forests notifies any bioresource and also such bioresources which are normally traded commodities, then the act will not apply to such resources. Now, that's a frightening prospect given the way in which our ministry works. And at that time, when we did our research, we found that the notification already been made in 2006, I think. And 190 plants which were notified as NTC, normally traded commodities, of them 15 were either threatened or critically endangered. When our colleagues checked just last week, we found that of the 15 in the 190 plants, 2 are close to extinction. So what case we made 10 years ago was, while biopiracy is a threat, the law itself is so framed that it offers no rescue to bioresources of India from such threats, because the law is so framed to support exploitation of bioresources and biodiversity of India. And that's a very serious problem, because look at the regulatory state of regulation in India today. As you may know, over the last 1 year, all 6 major environmental laws have been massively diluted by the Ministry of Environment and Forests. They have been made pro-corporate. In fact, they have been made so weak that it is almost impossible now, like a senior regulator said in a consultation we organized a couple of months ago in the National Law School, that it's almost like, we can see the thief running away and there's no power in us to catch him. So at least when we filed the case, there was that power. But if the bills, including the Biodiversity Act, which is proposed to be amended, and the bill is has gone through the parliamentary committees, and a lot of issues raised about it. Vandana was deposed before them. She will also bring that in, I suppose. If you read the text of the bill, it's almost like you're saying, 40 years of work to build environmental jurisprudence to protect India's biodiversity is being thrown into the dustbins of history, and we may have to rebuild this country. So on that note, I want to end by saying that this case, which was transferred to the NGT, we had challenged it almost 9 years ago. Now, judicial delay is, denial of justice. Judges say it, we all say it. Our case went through every Chief Justice from the time we filed the appeal in 2014. But somehow they didn't find time to hear the case. And we kept pressing because we knew that this was not about just Brinjal. It is about ensuring that the Biodiversity Act's strong provisions are protected and weak provisions are struck down as unconstitutional, or it might force the parliament to even amend them and make them stronger. But we find today a parliament which is making everything weaker. At least the government wants to make it very weak. So our hope now is that since the Supreme Court restored our PIL back to the High Court, our contention was, tribunals don't have powers to test the constitutional validity of a law. We hope that the High Court of Karnataka will go in depth into the long-term implications of the questions we have raised. And hopefully this will not just be a case about Brinjal or the NTC list, because the NTC list has now been expanded to make it 420 or 30 plants, species. And the frightening aspect of that is, despite so many questions being raised, absolutely no public inquiry was held. I mean, you can propose 800 plants to be exempt from the Biological Diversity Act through the Commerce Ministry. It goes to the Ministry of Environment, and it can easily be notified. So what is the point of having an act when almost all the plants you want to protect are just being taken away for commodification or financialization, and perhaps even genetic modification illegally? So on that note, I want to say that we hope to fight this case. before the High Court. And this is not just about ESG's case, it's a case about protecting the bioresources of this country, but more importantly, the fact that this is about protecting peoples, indigenous peoples, Adivasis, fisher, farming, agro-pastoral communities, and so on, who have protected them and raised thousands and thousands of varieties. And I think it's our collective responsibility to do that. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Leo, for walking us through everything that happened since 2012 and until like 2 weeks back. I now invite Aruna to share her experience with the GMO PIL that she's been fighting for a very long time now. Over to you, Aruna.
Hi, everybody. Karine, may I congratulate you on an ingenious idea. I think it gives us some clues as to how we may go forward, perhaps in court, challenging some of the decisions you have alluded to. Interestingly enough, I'll just cut across a few things. Karine made a point of patents not being on Volgard 1, and they were charging 75% of the seed value. The total royalties and traits that our farmers may have paid to Monsanto is about in excess of 14,000 crores in these 18 years. This is the data that is into the Supreme Court. With regard to the PIL that we are at the moment struggling with, it was filed in 2005, early, and perhaps is being heard for the second time in as many years, the last time on and off. So we have about 100 submissions in court, and I am being, I think, partly unfairly blamed for having too many submissions in court. But the problem is that while we wait for a court case to be heard, the government does something absolutely awful, which forces us to file another submission. And so it's just gone on, and every submission we file works against us. So in a sense, we are damned if we do and we are damned if we don't. I'm not quite sure how we should handle this. When it came to BT Brinjal, we managed to create a chink. We forced the government to publish the safety data in the public domain. I think that was the first time we really succeeded in something, and it led to the Jairam Ramesh moratorium. I must say that there was a change in government. He invited scientists to give their appraisal of the raw data. I wrote to about 12 top international scientists, including MS Swaminathan, Jack Heinemann. I won't go through the names. David Schubert. They all came in with the raw data appraisal, and it was damning. It formed part of the moratorium that Jairam Ramesh finally mandated. It's an indefinite moratorium. They have to do certain things to comply before it is lifted. They haven't done anything at all. Now we come to mustard. Mustard was first heard in around 2018, and we managed to get an unwritten but a court order nevertheless, that the government would not move at all with mustard until it approached the court. So the current plantings of mustard, whether for seed or whatever they have done, they have revived the whole process in the last few months, is in contempt of court. At the moment, in the last 5 weeks, I've actually made 4 trips to Delhi. I wasn't sure whether I was in Mao or whether I would wake up in the middle of the night, not knowing where the hell I was, totally disoriented. But there've been 5 hearings or 4 hearings in the case. And it's very interesting because we had an hour and a half of the government telling us, the SG, telling us how impeccable the regulation was. Now, it was like tick marks, they've got 4 pages of regulation, and he went through all the 4 pages, what was required, while we were listening for an hour and a half. None of that is actually implemented. This is the point. Then they said some time ago that HT stood for hybrid technology. This was way back in 2015. We were rather intrigued because we've never heard of HT standing for hybrid technology, but there's no point in me saying something, so I've got to get an expert in. And he finally went back into the history and said, never heard of this. This is something that the ministry has concocted. It's actually herbicide tolerance. Either you take a gene and put it into the plant for resistance to a herbicide that they're going to use. Now they come up with, it's not an HT crop because we are not going to ask farmers to spray. When this happened in court, I said, really, we moved from hybrid technology to the whims and fancies of the regulator. We're not going to ask farmers to spray, so it's not an HT crop. So the sum total of this is that it's the science that dictates what a crop is. If you put a BT gene into a plant, it's a BT crop. If you put a herbicide tolerant gene into a plant, it becomes a herbicide tolerant. It's the science that dictates the crop. So this is where we are at the moment. The next case has been deferred to the 10th of January. And I'm hoping that we'll be able to prove that we don't need this crop at all on 2 grounds. One is, like BT Brinjal, it's a crop of origin. If not origin, India is a center of diversification, which essentially means the same thing. If you're a country of origin of a crop, the crop takes to the country's agriculture and climate, and you have many varieties, including wild species. So in mustard, we've got over 4,200 varieties of mustard, including wild species. The other is the devastation that HT does to the environment. It's also toxic to human health and animal health. It's a completely unsustainable technology. And on these 2 grounds, mustard, it's not, is there a need for mustard? It's that mustard is definitely not needed. I can't think of a single reason why this crop should be allowed into India. Partly because we'd be completely contaminated. It's interesting if ESG wins this case, I would be very interested to know whether there's any aspect of the case that applies to mustard as well. Have they taken some varieties of mustard without farmers' permission, without state governments, and have they stolen up India's intellectual property, not company property, but the country's intellectual property? I'd be really, really interested to find out, and I think we should pursue it. So on the 10th, I'm hoping very, very much that they will see that this crop is not required. There's also no need for it because we come back to an issue of yield. Now, the interesting thing is that in 2016, I filed a rather complex submission based on right to information filed with the Directorate of Rapeseed Mustard Research in Bharatpur. There may have been, it looks as though I probably rattled their cage because they actually replied in an affidavit to court that we never said anywhere that we out-yield other mustard varieties or hybrids. Can you imagine? They buried themselves deep, 6 foot under. So we are on absolutely solid ground from an admission from the government itself that it doesn't out-yield other mustard varieties or hybrids. Now, the point is that the mustard technology that they're using in GM involves what you call a sterilization technology with a fertility restorer. The reason for this is mustard is a closed pollinating crop, so it makes selfies. You can't make hybrids too easily. You can. It's not that you can't, because it also what's the word when a crop also pollinates outside its closed breeding cycle. Someone help me. Is
it contamination?
No, Leo. It also not outsources, but it cross-pollinates outside to about 20%. Do you understand what I'm saying? I'm expressing myself badly. It also cross-pollinates 20% of the time, but is mostly a closed pollinating crop. So, based on this, they said, we will be able to increase yield because we have a sterilization technology, and then we have a fertility restorer called Barnase, so you get it back in its complex. But this is not a hybrid technology. It facilitates the making of hybrids. And we've got enough technologies in the natural way of making hybrids that already outperforms mustard. So we can't see the reason for this crop either. It just doesn't make any sense at all. It is totally out-yielded, and it is accepted by the government themselves in an affidavit to the court that we do not out-yield non-GMO mustards or varieties. We've got all the data. So to cut a very long story short, and I don't want to take up more time, I'm hoping, not against hope, but hoping with hope, that we will stop this mustard and we will get a court order saying no. Later on, if there are any questions that you wish to ask, we can always come back to this. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Aruna, for walking us through this entire case. And we will all keep our fingers crossed and wishing you good luck. I now invite Vandana to share her thoughts. I just saw Vandana. She joined us, right?
We can see that she's there. Perhaps she has stepped away for a minute.
Okay. So should we?
She's speaking, but we are not able to hear her.
No.
Now they're putting. Yeah, hello?
Yeah, Vandana.
Yeah, but for some reason my video is not coming on. Can you put that on too? Or no? Host asked you to start your video. Okay. Yeah.
See you.
But it was all being blocked at another end. Okay. Yeah. But thank you, Karine, for doing the book. Thank you, dear friends, for all of you slogging away over decades. My own seed activism begins in '87, when Meera and I had both been called to a conference on biotechnology. It was called Laws of Life, organized by the Dag Hammarskjöld Foundation at a retreat called Bourget, and then at the Geneva headquarters of the United Nations. And the industry laid out clearly, they said, we have to do genetic engineering in order to take patents on seed and to enforce it on the world. We have to have an international law, which became the TRIPS agreement of WTO. And by the time we're finished, by year 2000, the project was year 2000. We are now in 2022. They said there'll be 5 companies controlling all food and all health. And these 5 companies will be the ones with the biggest patents in their hands. And farmers saving seeds will be illegal. because intellectual property is designed for making saving seeds illegal. So that's the day I then decided I was going to save seeds and started Navdanya, first saving seeds through Research Foundation, 91 Navdanya. And the seed activism, included both the work with parliament, work in government, work with farmers to save seeds. And because this history is sadly not written up, and it should have been written up, so that, when Karine writes books, these things are there. Two people have been vital to the history of IPRs in this country. First is Mr. S.P. Shukla, who was our GATT ambassador, who actually ensured that plant animal exemptions would be in Article 27.3b. He put the sui generis option in Article 27.3b. So the openings that we got was really Mr. Shukla. Domestically, a person who had worked in the patent office, D.K. Kela, created the National Working Group on Patent Law. We wouldn't be where we are without that working group. Meera was part of it. Most of the people worked on pharmaceuticals. I was the only one working on genetic resources. And out of that effort came two major articles that are being threatened again by free trade agreements. Article 3J to not allow evergreening in medicines, and Article 3J that says plants, animals, and seeds and their parts are not patentable. Karine did make a statement that there was no expertise in these areas till WTO TRIPS was created. And I think that is a misconception. We have the most advanced patent law, the 1972 patent law. It used to be called the model law. And it was very clear what should not be patentable. That is expertise. Agriculture, nothing, not seeds, not methods, nothing, because of the fact that we are an agrarian society. And in medicine, only process patents were allowed, not product patents. So the WTO actually undid our expertise to create the openings for monopolies, both in medicine and in agriculture, and the same companies are big pharma and big ag. The same buyers sell the medicines and have challenged our 3D on the cancer drug in the Supreme Court, just as much as Monsanto tried very hard to knock out Article 3J. And if you look at the media, they made it look like they had won, but they did not. 3J is intact. Article 3J is intact. So the next step was when a full-page ad came in the Indian papers saying, Bolgard, the Indian farmers will have Bolgard in 2 years' time. Now, I knew because from that time onwards, I was looking at GATT, intellectual property, biosafety, everything. And there had been failure of BT cotton in Texas, and the trade name is Bolgard. So they said, we have started the trials and the farmers will have the seed commercially. So I rang up the Ministry of Environment, I rang up Ministry of Agriculture, did you give approval? They'd not heard of Monsanto, they hadn't heard of Bolgard. And then somehow the Ministry of Environment scrambled together after the trials an approval, but sadly through the DBT, through the RCGM. We have a biosafety law that precedes the Cartagena Biosafety Protocol that flows after the Convention on Biological Diversity. And I was part of the expert group of implementing Article 19.3 of the CBD. The 1989 rules are very, very clear. They were drafted by scientists. And imports of deliberate release were all to be approved through the GAC. So quickly the RCGM sends letters to the governments, to seed dealers, to say you can start these trials. That's when we filed a case in the Supreme Court under a writ petition. I think it's number 71 of 1999. Monsanto's ad were 98. 6th January, we filed it. And it was basically about proving that the government's regulation was ultra-virus, that the RCGM was not the body for approvals, it was merely the body for lab safety. And because of that case, in a way, GAC woke up and the regulatory system granted an approval, fascinately, about a week after the same GAC had said for Bharat 51 that this is so dangerous, it must be totally uprooted. And And next week, Monsanto had got to them and managed to get the approval. The key issue on the intellectual property question is it was totally married to the GMO and biosafety question. They are not separable. And because so much, is not always traceable, every case, first of all, Monsanto lied to the Indian industry. They showed an American patent and got those licensing arrangements signed and extracted that 75%. And when they tried the Bolgard 2 and wanted to increase the royalty extraction, that's when farmers' movements and the seed companies jointly challenged in Andhra first. And we intervened. I've intervened in every case related to seed, including the 3J challenge of Monsanto. We then intervened in the Karnataka High Court when Monsanto and the industry tried to challenge the seed price control order that regulated the price of seed. But it isn't just the patent law with the exemption on plants, animals, and seeds. This is why most of the clauses in Monsanto's patent claim were knocked down by the Patent Office because of Article 3J. And for those who want to know, these since 1987, that work is in a book that's available in India from Nataraj called Origin, The Plunder of Nature Knowledge, all the biodiversity, seed, intellectual property story, including all cases of biopiracy that we have fought, from neem, which took 11 years, to wheat, which took 0 time, when Monsanto had patented ancient Indian wheat varieties, and then of course, all the medicinal plants. The same book is available internationally as Reclaiming the Commons from Synergetic Press. So what do we look ahead at? I think we need to all be deeply aware that Article 3D and 3J are pillars of our sovereignty. And just like the Biodiversity Act is being undone, as Leo just mentioned, every trade treaty is attacking these acts. I know the United States is desperate to attack 3J because it comes in their way. So we'll have to organize in new ways because the times are different. I mean, we could work with multi-party committees in Parliament. We could sit with government and write the Farmers' Rights Law and the Biodiversity Act. Those times have changed. So we need to be far more innovative and creative. And definitely, I want to thank Karine that she pulled together things that don't usually join. The Brazilian case, I used to advise the region of Rio Grande do Sul. They wanted to be GMO free, and Monsanto smuggled the seeds across the border and then spread them. And then, of course, after a while, then Lula had to approve the GMO seeds. But I think bringing Brazil and India, and in India, the cotton case and the Brinjal case, and maybe in the next edition, you'll just have to add a mustard case to complete the story. This will be an ongoing story. And when the companies had said, we'll be 5 companies controlling all seed and all food and health, there are 4 companies controlling 60% of the seed of the world. And these giants have now, they don't violate law, they make law. And we are in a whole different place right now. And that's why reclaiming sovereignty, seed sovereignty of farmers, national sovereignty of countries, of knowledge, of biodiversity, has to become a global phenomenon. I'm so tired trying to tell my American friends that you have slept through the patenting of life. And in America, I remember the ambassador, I'm talking to the ambassador in Geneva, and US ambassador said, no, we have one single agenda, to redefine life as a manufacture. So we can claim it as an invention. And in the US, while our patent office threw out Monsanto claim on a climate resilient patent, in the United States, there was a case of Monsanto versus Bauman, where the courts of US ruled seed is a self-replicating machine invented by Monsanto. So these issues, I mean, they've thought through centuries ahead and said, we'll control life on Earth, just like Kissinger said, you control food on Earth. And for us all, the question of freedom lies in the seed and in our knowledge. So thank you, Karine, and thank you, ESG, for putting this together.
Thank you, Vandana, for those very insightful thoughts on 3D, 3J, the role of WTO, and more. I now request Farida to take the floor. And I request all our speakers to wait till the end for the question answer session, please. Thank you. Over to you, Farida.
Thank you, Bhargavi, and to ESG and to Karine. And I just want to, say that Seed Activism book, I have read it part, some chapters, particularly on B.T. Brinjal. And I was quite interested when I saw a chapter named Who Owns B.T. Brinjal. Can you see this poster that we have made in 2013 when we were protesting against B.T. Brinjal approval, and we were standing in front of the Bangladesh Agriculture Research Institute, and we were actually, they called up police to get rid of us. But this was interesting that we also thought of at that time, that the question is who owns B.T. Brinjal. So let me, the story, I want to share the story about B.T. Brinjal in Bangladesh. Perhaps if Karine will add in her next edition, this story should also go on, because as she said, the company looks for the holes that they can get in and get away with. And we were working against golden rice and B.T. Brinjal for, since 1999. But suddenly we saw in July 11, 2013, an English daily, had a big, banner heading called Bangladesh is set to join elusive club of GM crop growing countries. And then they claimed, they talked, most of the people would not understand GM Brinjal, but they said that GM Brinjal is infused with a bacterial gene that destroys pests. So this is important. And no pesticide is needed. So again, people get interested in it. On the other hand, traditional brinjal is vulnerable to pests. So you can imagine that how people get interested in BT brinjal. And that excessive use of pesticides by farmers poses health hazards. So then they in fact talked to us. And so when we said that government is not sharing the results of the trials they are doing, they put that in also to balance the report. And that we apprehend that farmers will have to buy seeds from multinationals. But, and also the scientists promised at that time that before approval, they will actually consult with the relevant people, which they never did. So we actually protested and raised concerns on biosafety grounds, and also that the country will be exposed to the risk of biological pollution. So, and also the thing is that BT brinjal is going to deal with only one pest, fruit and shoot borer, but there are many other pests attacking brinjals, and many traditional varieties have much less risk of pest attack. In fact, many are resistant to pest attack. And, those can be managed by the farmers themselves. So they didn't need to genetically modify it. And yes, it was true that pesticides were being used in huge amounts for hybrid brinjals, not the traditional brinjals. So they mixed it up. And then we, raised concerns that Bangladesh is also part of the region which is called Center of Origin of brinjals. And there are at least 248 varieties of brinjals found in different districts. Each district has different varieties, different cooking ways. But government never looked at that. Bangladesh Agriculture Research Institute developed 19 hybrid varieties, and that were allowed to be cultivated commercially and use huge resources. And also, Karine mentioned in her book about the Sadhguru tripartite agreement. We got this agreement through journalists, and this is very interesting that how the government actually signed it on March 14, 2005, and nobody knew about it, and for the development of BT brinjals, and we only came to know about it in 2013 when the approval process was going on. And the agreement states Monsanto Mexico preserves all the intellectual property rights of the technology. And also there is a section 1.19 says all BT gene is a Monsanto or Mexico technology, and IPR of the concerned will be infringed by unauthorized distribution of products containing BT gene. Then another subsection 9.2 it said that it can be terminated by sub-licensor, that means Mexico, if the laws and regulations in Bangladesh do not provide assurance of protection for commercial and intellectual property rights. So it was really making them in their favor. And also, there is a section in the agreement 8.9 which agrees to give indemnity to Monsanto Mexico and Sadhguru for any kind of disaster concerning BT brinjal research. These are not even known to people, and these are gross violation of people's sovereignty over their natural resources. So, and Bangladesh, unfortunately, has very weak law and legally stipulated regulatory authority to adequately safeguard ecology, biodiversity, and human health. And the Biosafety Act was never finalized. We attended many meetings, and in the last days, they used to call a meeting, but without letting us know, and the letters we never received. So finally, they have a biosafety rules which was passed in 2012, and information is not available in Ministry of Environment or anywhere. You can find it in ISA, website, and so they through them we have to know about it. Field trials of BT brinjal were held around the country, agriculture research stations under BARI, and no report was ever published for public consumption. We have demanded for the report, but no report was there. 9 traditional varieties were patented by Monsanto, and these are, I want to name them because these are real names given by our farmers. The Uttara, Kajla, Nayantara, Shingna, Dohajari, Chaga, Khotkotia, Islampuri, and Ishodi local. And now you will find in the Sadhguru agreement in the back page with some accession numbers. So that means these brinjals are no more known in their original names. Among these 9 varieties, 4 varieties were released were given approval for field cultivation, and now they are called BT brinjal 1, 2, 3, and 4. And so the approval was given by National Committee on Biosafety on October 30, 2013. It said for a limited scale, and it gave 7 conditions. None of these were followed. If I'm getting over time, please let me know. We filed a case on 25th July 2013, and with 5 petitioners, including some farmers. And we were talking about local varieties will be affected, and we were talking about the IPR issue. And also we said that in the absence of any legal and regulatory regime to protect biodiversity and local and traditional knowledge, any decision to allow any germplasm that belong to people and in custody, will be a violation of the rights of the citizen of Bangladesh. The case was dismissed on 23rd September. You can see the government was really in a hurry to give approval. There was another case on, and the court gave a rule in their favor to follow Codex Alimentarius Commission guideline, but that was not followed either. So no report was really presented, and the approval was given on 30th October, and the first batch of seeds were given in January 2014. We contacted many international scientists. Aruna helped us very much, Vandana, and our other friends internationally helped us contact international friends like David Schubert. They all wrote to Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina to stop the approval process. And this approving authority is actually sitting, one of the main executive committee on biotechnology is sitting in the Prime Minister's office. So that means they did not want to listen. So, but we were on the street. We, with other environmental groups like Bela, Bangladesh Poribesh Andolon, and many journalists were in our favor, who brought many documents to us, which helped us in, developing our writings. And really, I would say that afterwards, we have been following the fields where BT brinjals were grown and met the farmers. We were attacked by police whenever we went there, but we found that our soil have rejected BT brinjal. It didn't grow well at all. The consumers rejected it in the market because it does not taste at all good. Our traditional varieties are much, much better. So it is a failure case, but it is a case where companies can do anything and use our government and even the parliament to work in their favor. Thank you.
Thank you, Farida. It will be good if you can also share some of the writings, if there are any, in the chat box, and I'm sure our audience will enjoy reading in detail. It was very interesting, the entire story listening to you, and it is deeply saddening that some of the traditional varieties today are, no longer known by their original names, but known as Brinjal 1, 2, 3, 4. So I will now request Vivek Karyappa to come in. And thanks to Vivek and his friends many, many years ago, this was in 2009, November, December. It was he and his friends who actually brought a lot of material and dumped it in our office and said, please go it and see what's in it, how we can fight this whole BT brinjal. And I remember the many nights and days where we had to literally bury ourselves in all those documents to make sense of all the research that Vivek had done. Over to you, Vivek.
Okay, I'll begin by saying this is my first Zoom call. So if I make any bloopers, please excuse me. I have not done Zoom ever before. Well, it was interesting and educational listening to what everybody is doing. And I'm going to stick to only what I'm doing. So I hope I will not digress and take too much time. So where I live in a very remote place, which is on the edge of the national parks, Bandipur and Nagarhole game sanctuaries. And this is an area where BT cotton has unfortunately been a success in the sense of when BT cotton came in, the yields jumped quite a bit. Though in the last few years, the yields have dropped and pesticide use has increased exponentially. So I I'm not able to talk about or against GMOs or patented seeds because, well, to be honest, farmers, especially cotton farmers, are very happy with the idea that there is something that will cut down their work in the fields, where you can just plant your crop and spray herbicide. And that's it. And you don't need to harrow. You don't need to keep a set of animals to do harrowing. You don't need to work in your fields every day. You can just go and spray herbicide, and that's it. So it is going to be a challenge. So I've started to talk to Forest Department, and I'm talking not just in our area, but in mustard growing areas up north also, where mustard is grown on the edge of national parks, Rajasthan, MP, etc., Gujarat and all that. Then I'm asking that, for the first thing is that my contention or my idea is that the habitat of the wildlife extends way beyond the boundaries of the forest, which is accepted fact. That is why we have the eco-sensitive zones concept. Now, what I'm trying to say, focus on is the effects of herbicide. So I'm taking arguments like, I as a farmer spray my fields with herbicide, the bunds and the other areas. Wild animals come and graze at night, they die. Who's going to be responsible? In the same way, if I as a farmer use modern day technology to spray herbicide on my farms, say as an example, I use a drone, which I can get actually a bank loan on. I use drones to spray herbicide on my field. And there's a beautiful breeze that day, and the breeze takes all the herbicide that I'm spraying on the drone into the forest. The animals eat, herbivores die. Who's responsible? I'm saying, since the animals, if they die on my land, the farmer is held responsible according to present day law. But the farmer is not doing anything illegal. We're just spraying herbicide. But if the animal dies within the forest, then the forest department officials are to be held responsible, where the public can file FIRs against them because they are the custodians of the forest and custodians of the wildlife within the forest. Then the other thing, now our area doesn't grow mustard, but when I'm talking to farmers and farmer groups up north, and incidentally, I've been speaking to the people who fund and look after cows in the north. I asked them, mustard is grown in the winter. Now, if our farmers and we spray mustard with herbicide in the winter, we destroy and kill all the fodder that is available for the cows, especially the stray animals. And then we go into summer. There's no fodder going to be left. So in that sense, what are we doing for what the law that the state says that cow protection is a national duty today? So my question here is, if the state itself allows technology that kills cows, who's responsible now? Is the state not responsible? So I'm using 2-3 of these kind of issues to try and get through public apathy. That is the biggest, how do I say it? The biggest wall that I'm facing is public apathy from everywhere. Then the other thing that I'm using here in the Indian context is that Roundup contains 15% of it is a surfactant which makes it water soluble and helps it to come into that the plant can absorb it. Now that surfactant in Roundup is something called polyethoxylated tallow-amine. Now tallow-amine is extracted from beef tallow. So I mean, you might say that I'm nuts, I'm crazy, I'm talking nonsense, so be it. But I say, you know, we had a revolution way back in 1857 where tallow was being used as grease, right? And here you are having tallow-based stuff being sprayed on our crops, on our fields, which part of it we are ingesting. And since Roundup, glyphosate, is water soluble, we have in our area 3 rivers and 3 dams, many lakes, water bodies, where the wash off of the herbicide goes and settles, and that water is pumped. I mean, I live about 220 kilometers due south of Bangalore. Bangalore water supply comes from my area, from the Kavani Dam. Now, so I'm asking consumers and the citizens of Bangalore, if my area, HD Kote, where I come from, we farmers start planting herbicide tolerant cotton, and we start using herbicides indiscriminately, do you think you will not be drinking herbicide laced water? Because it's all going to come from our dams. So I'm trying to use such issues because today I'm seeing that public apathy is come to the point where when I talk about seeds being owned by foreign multinationals and biodiversity issues and sovereignty issues, I've had people come back to me and say, well, it is good to have more companies, foreign companies come in, otherwise we'll be ruled by 2 or 3 Indian companies anyway. So let there be more competition. So the understanding of what might happen is just not there. And I'm also seeing that the cohesiveness that civil society had during the campaign against BT Brinjal is just not there now. It's just not there. And honestly, I feel that a lot of civil society organizations will not talk against what the state is doing today. That's the way the situation is. People are afraid to say things. And I'll keep this short. Karine and Leo, I get the feeling that you feel that the law of the land should be upheld. But this thing that we call a benevolent state is an oxymoron. It means nothing. It doesn't exist. There's extraction at all levels and many different levels. And we as a society, we as people, short-lived that we are, we protect only what we cherish. Now, I can see that a lot of you with so much enthusiasm and commitment for all these years that you've come across. Now, I'm at loggerheads with myself in the sense of how do I put this message across to people, farmers around me, officials, that we need to understand, or we need to, how do you get somebody to cherish nature? Because that is, unfortunately, today it has become a economic, economic policy or a way of doing things is that you push cost, especially agricultural cost, onto the environment. Because the environment cost can be paid by later generations. You don't have to pay it. So that has become, now I feel it has become a part of the way of doing things, push cost onto the environment. So how do you get people to cherish the environment? So I'm here also because Leo wanted me to share thoughts. And I'm here also to learn from you guys, from all of you, and maybe get some ideas from you, because I tend to work more on my own. So yeah, I need help. Please, anybody have ideas, suggestions, please. I'm all open. Thank you very much for having me here. And yeah, all the best to you all.
Thank you, Vivek, for that very interesting perspective, and also for sharing the many interesting things that you are doing to address these challenges. I now invite Mr. Aneel Hegde, who's the MP and who recently raised a couple of very interesting questions in the Parliament. Over to you, Mr. Aneel.
Thank you for inviting me to this meeting, virtual meeting. First of all, I'd like to congratulate Ms. Karine Peschard for her work on seed activism, patent politics, and litigation in the global South. I also congratulate Leo for his PIL in the Karnataka High Court. Friends, I come from the neighboring village of Mattu, where a local variety of Brinjal, which was sought to be genetically modified, and subsequently the environment support group and Leo went to filed a PIL in the Karnataka High Court against the custodians of the Dharwad Agricultural University, who like without a mandate, they entered into an agreement with the Monsanto, which was an act of biopiracy. Friends, we all know in the 90s, our haldi, neem, and basmati rice was patented abroad, and Vandana Shiva, along with other farmer leaders and all, had worked and went ahead, fought the case in the International High Court, and was also responsible for getting the patent revoked. Now, like so that things like that never happens in future. In 2001, the then government had established this PPVFRA, Protection of Plants and Farmers' Rights Authority, and to prevent such biopiracy, biopiracy. Now, coming back to the environment support group's PIL against the Dharwad University scientists who had indulged in biopiracy. I remember the strong comments made by the judge of the Karnataka High Court against those particular scientists, and also the irony that instead of such officials being punished, they were promoted, and the person was made the head of the PPVFRA. It is in Kannada. Many of you are from Karnataka here, So there's a saying in Kannada called Beliye Holavannu Meidante, meaning fence grazing the crops or fence eating the crops. So friends, like I've been associated with ever since 1991, when the new economic policy was initiated, and subsequently, which led to the signing of the GATT treaty. I was my party's leader, Mr. George Fernandez, had taken initiative for several campaigns, and I was throughout actively involved in his campaign, right from the days when the Prime Minister was P.V. Narasimha Rao. Subsequently, Deve Gowda ji was the Prime Minister. Subsequently, I.K. Gujral was the Prime Minister. Subsequently, Atal Bihari Vajpayee was the Prime Minister, in which government George Fernandez himself was, who was the NDA convener, was the Defense Minister also. During the time, from every day from George Fernandez's house only, we used to take the national flag and hold protests at Jantar Mantar for 14 long years without a day's break. Every day we were protesting against the multinationals and the GATT treaty. And friends, another thing, I was also a seat saver a few years back when I made efforts to settle down in my village. Presently I live in Bihar. There I had saved 134 varieties of paddy. And coming to BT Brinjal, friends, when in October 2009, when the GESC under the Environment Ministry had approved the BT Brinjal, my party's Chief Minister Nitish Kumar was the first Chief Minister to write a letter in protest against the field trials of BT Brinjal. And various other chief ministers also followed suit, and various civil society organizations also protested against this. And I congratulate the then environment minister, who was probably in the initial days in support of the genetic modification of BT Brinjal. Subsequently, he listened to the opposition, and he listened to the farmers, he listened to the civil society groups, and despite various pressures against it, he, as a minister, he brought the moratorium on BT Brinjal. Friends, my chief minister was also on the GM mustard thing. My chief minister is already, he had written against the GM mustard to the present Prime Minister and the former Environment Minister Javadekar and all. And my party opposes this GM mustard. And friends, I have been with the Vandana Shiva ji, I have been in since the 90s. I have been in close contact with her, and I remember still she had organized a demonstration against the Monsanto, in which in the one floor and the fourth floor or whatever floor they had their office, and I and my 2-3 friends tried to ransack and created a lot of noise in that. And then Vandana Shiva, my police, when they pulled me, she got me released and all. Anyway, that was, and now, friends, I have been inside the parliament. I have raised so many questions, and some of which are have been selected in the ballot also. In the next week or sometimes I'll get answers to those questions. Though I know mostly these things will also be vague. And our friend Vivek Karyappa is here. Recently, just now what Vivek Karyappa was mentioning to us about the herbicide spraying of herbicides in the HT cotton field. I had like when I heard about this from Karyappa, I was actually on the 11th, 12th, and 13th of this month. I was in Mysore for a meeting on the this thing on the farmers had organized a meeting, and there I took time and went to Mr. Karyappa's farm, and I got to know about it. And subsequently, on the 7th of this month, when the Wildlife Act was passed in the Parliament, Wildlife Bill was passed. Actually, I was since 2000. Since October 25 of this year, when GM mustard was given clearance, I was disturbed, and I was thinking the first opportunity I should seize, and I should speak against this in the Parliament. And fortunately, on that day, on the 7th of this thing, December, there was this Wildlife Act getting passed, and I got an opportunity in the for a star question. Some of them said I was talking out of context, but I was not talking out of context. I was actually, in the Wildlife Bill, there was a clause called invasive alien species, which I discussed with so many people, and I, even from Vivek Karyappa, I got confirmed, and I told people, told them inside the Parliament, I made the point that there are places like one is this spraying of herbicides. This harms the bees, which are pollinators, and which is responsible for giving us more yield. And also, the second point was that I made was Mr. Karyappa's point that in Bandipur Reserve Forest area, around that area, there are farmers who are growing HT mustard, and where they spray herbicides on drones. So, so far, since the government has not made any study whether it actually harms the elephants which come to the HT cotton field, till such time we should not pass this wildlife amendment bill. There is no point in making this, and there is we should based on the precautionary principle, we should we should not rush through the bill. This is the point I made. Anyway, whatever point I had to make, I make, and I'll continue to do. And I've been in touch with several members of Parliament, various other parties in the opposition, and I'm sure we'll get support from them. I do not know how far we will be able to stop the GM mustard, but definitely I'll try. I'll do my best. I think I'm my time. Is my time over, or hello?
If you want to take another couple of minutes, you can.
No, okay. Like, I've been associated with the the various groups in the country who are working, who are campaigning against genetically modified crops. I've in the year 2012 or so, I've read the Parliamentary Standing Committee report, which was Parliament. This particular standing committee was headed by Basudev Acharya, and that report had unanimously asked for a moratorium on genetically modified crops. And ever since then, though from 1994, I was deeply involved in the campaign against GATT, and because George Fernandez had started this agitation, which Vandana Shiva and others also know. She mentioned the names of SP Shuklaji and B.K. Kialaji, and George Fernandez actually was working very closely with both Mr. SP Shukla and who was a GATT ambassador, and plus B.K. Kialaji. and we were all those days in the opposition, and plus like I know about how Vandana Shiva had given evidence about James Enyart, who was the person from this one of these multinationals who wrote the gave inputs to the Dunkel draft, which ultimately was our government had to sign in April of 1994, against which even after that signing of the draft, my George Fernandez and his organization campaigned against it for 14 years. And every day people from his organization used to quote arrest. And I vividly remember the things what you people have, inputs what you have given about the BT cotton, where initially the Monsanto subsidiary Myco used to sell 450 grams of BT cotton seeds for 800 rupees. And subsequently, when they got to know that they own 97% of the seeds, they started selling it for 2,700 rupees. So, I can assure you, friends, that whatever from my side I can do, I'll do, and I'll keep in touch with you people. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Aneel Hegde, and wishing you all the strength to bring about the much needed changes in the context of agriculture and our biodiversity. We will now open the forum for some questions. So there is already a question from Alexandra. I know we've run out of time, but we'll just take a couple of questions, and before we get another final round of thoughts from all our speakers. So the question from Alexandra is, she's an environmental lawyer in Mexico. She says, amazing discussion. And she asked, what are the parallel strategies along with the PIL from farmers or Adivasi rights that could work against patents? And she mentions that in Mexico and Latin America, 169 agreement, ILO has been kind, useful tool, and other international regional strategies. If any of you would like to take that. Vandana? Yeah, Vandana.
Yeah, because corn is so important to Mexico, and Mexico itself has declared corn cultural heritage, that it's their cultural identity. And they're using that to block the biopiracy. There's a huge case on, the nitrogen fixing corn that fixes literally from the air, not from the soil. And this piracy happened, and this is an ongoing challenge that's going on. So I think Brazil, Mexico, India, they have so much to share. And Mexico have just said they're going to ban glyphosate and ban GMO corn. So Mexico is setting a very strong example.
Thank you. There are some other people who work on these issues on a daily basis that I see among the participants. It'll be great if any of you would like to share your thoughts. We also have a friend from Kenya, Odenda Lumumba, who has been working on land and biodiversity issues. Odenda, if even you want to share some of your thoughts, you're welcome to share your thoughts. And I also see Vishala, Suprabha. Please do share your thoughts as well before we close. Yeah, Odenda.
Yeah, mine is basically to say that our continued activism between Kenya and India, I think, is much needed. Kenya is now at a point where they want to import GMO in the country. Already there are disputes whether the GMOs already has left America to Kenya. That is maize for feeding the hungry, because we are having a drought and food shortage, which has been almost there ever since. But we have no clear guidance on how that is going to affect the maize farmers in Kenya. So we are watching the situation, and basically we are going to pick on this experience, and it is very timely that you have shared with us the book and this discussion. It encourages us to position ourselves going forward. Incidentally, I transitioned on from civil society work, but I'm still actively engaged in a number of processes. So I will be contacting some of you, or most of you, on these efforts, what is happening in Kenya, and it will be of interest to all of us. Thanks.
Thank you,
I want to
Odenda.
say one thing, Bhargavi, that Odenda, if you could just briefly touch on the recent stay on the import of GMOs in Kenya, and what is the status of that? Thank you.
What happened is basically that we have a new government in power, which is hardly 100 days in power. When they came on, they basically said they were going to import maize regardless of what the law says, because the cabinet met and they decided they will import GMO maize. But the parliament had ruled out that, and that had not yet been revisited. So a lot of Kenyans went to court to block that. It is stalled, but at the moment they are saying that the food crisis will be critical by end of January, and they will be importing assorted food. Now, assorted food doesn't mean anything. Assorted food for us means GMO, maize, wheat, or rice, or whatever else they want to import. So we are still watching what exactly is going on. And mostly this GMO is coming from US, because Bill Gates was in Kenya, and the best he did to represent their interests with Monsanto and the others was basically to say he has never seen any problem with eating GMO. And he was meeting all who mattered, and trying to always use the NGO, the Bill Gates Foundation, to try and compromise some of the counties where food shortages exist, in terms of starting to pilot the growing of GMO maize in Kenya. So the Kenyan situation is dicey, and definitely we will need to pick from all this we have learned from this discussion to see how we can really put up a resistance to this kind of manipulation by the new government.
Thank you, Odenda. I see Alexandra's hand again. Alexandra, would you like to speak something? Yeah.
Hello, thank you to everyone, and it's a pleasure to me to be here with such people that have been amazing work. I have some questions to the people that have experience, of course, Vandana Shiva, that the community seed banks experience in India. So I am aware, so also in Mexico, there are a lot of community seed banks in the south of Mexico. So what are the challenges and the opportunity of the community seed banks in this context? And in Mexico, the protection of the corn, the maize, is also providing to create by the government community seed banks. And also, with what is the model of community seed banks that we should looking forward? Thank you.
Yeah, Vandana.
So, the first thing I did after the 1987 meeting is make a commitment that I'm going to save seeds. I didn't know how to do it, but I learned. You learn anything that you care for. And we began basically because intellectual property and patents are an enclosure of the commons of seed and knowledge. A community seed bank is a reclaiming of the commons. So a community seed bank is, of course, of the community. Seed has never belonged to individuals. It's always been a common resource. And when you ask, I started community seed banks to fight intellectual property and monopoly. And it plays that role, very big role. We saved every seed that we could find. Among the seeds we had saved were climate resilient, salt tolerant, flood tolerant rices that helped us help farmers during the Orissa cyclone and during the tsunami, and now during the increasing climate in extremes and intensities. So, you know, the World Bank and the corporations have this new economics called willingness to pay. The rich will decide how much of the world is worth saving, how many seeds are worth saving. Nature and our ancestors didn't distinguish this seed is useful, every seed was useful. So save every seed that you can, save it as a community, share it as a community. I have participated in amazing festivals, also in Mexico, you know, just like for us, we have festivals around rice, we have festivals around millets. Our festivals are very important ways of remembering for this culture. You know, I think Vivek talked about the fact that you can only protect what you love. And festivals allow us to remember what we love and who we are. The third thing is never centralize. You know, I could have centralized our seed bank in one place. And I knew these people are so vicious. You know, if they can threaten me when I filed the case in 99, they can destroy. It takes nothing to destroy a seed bank. So we diversified. Also because different seeds are in different places. And we facilitated 150 community seed banks in India so far. But across the world, it's a movement that will not stop. It can only grow, especially now that Mr. Gates, and you know, when Adamba was talking, I was remembering a quote of Mr. Gates says, I've never eaten anything but GMO bread made of GMO wheat and food made of GMO corn. There is no GMO wheat. You know, he just lies his way through and he thinks his power can carry his lie. So now he's pushing fake food, you know, the GMO corn, soya, and all of these GMOs will be feedstock to produce amino acids, proteins for lab food. That's the vision they have, farming without farmers, food without farms. And I would say, you know, for them, of course, the seed will still be there, but it'll be rendered totally invisible. And now with the new imagination they have of the end of farmers and end food, are saving seeds in community seed banks and creating food communities where producers of food and eaters of food connect as one community. That's the work we have to do. And that's the way to fight intellectual property.
Thank you. Thank you, Vandana. So before I ask all our panelists to share their final thoughts, I would request Bharat to come on board and share his thoughts. Bharat? Bharat, are you there? I see his hand raised.
Okay.
Bharat, can you hear me?
Yeah, you. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Can you hear me now? Okay,
Yes.
thank you. So my camera is not working, but a very brief input from me. I'm part of a national network of seed savers called the India Seed Sovereignty Alliance. And just last month, we had a big national seed festival as part of a larger farmers gathering in Mysore from the 11th to the 13th of November. And we came out with the India Seed Sovereignty Declaration, the Seed Sovereignty Declaration, with inputs from a lot of people who are into seed saving and concerned with issues related to seed. I've sent a copy of that to Leo, and I'd be glad if he shares it in the chat box. People might find it helpful, useful, and yeah, nothing more to add right now.
Okay, thank you, Bharat. I now request all our panelists for some final thoughts, and we could probably go in the same order we followed. I would request Leo to come towards the end, but Aruna, Vandana, Farida, Vivek, and Anil. Aruna, over to you.
And Karine as well.
Yeah, and Karine as well. I thought Karine could come later after all of them. Yeah, Aruna, over to you. You have to unmute probably. I'm not able to hear you.
Will someone else come in while I think what I want to say as a final.
Okay, sure. Vandana, you want to go?
Sure, sure. The best to all of you. Yeah. Difficult work, but the best work one could be doing.
Thank you. Thank you. Farida?
Yeah, I just want to add a little bit on the Community Seed Wealth Center. You know, we call it Community Seed Wealth Center because seed is a wealth to the farmers. So that thing we, follow. And also it is important that, farmers must have their own collection of seeds. So Vandana said it very correctly that we don't just centralize it, we just decentralize, and there are seed herds all around. So that is one thing. And I want to add one thing today, the role of the international media like BBC took a very, very, bad role in BT Brinjal propaganda of the company. So that kind of thing, we had a big debate with them. And also now BT cotton and golden rice are in the pipeline of getting approved. Vandana was there in one meeting against it, an online meeting, but this is what we are still fighting on.
Could I just make a little intervention to support what Farida is saying?
Sure.
You know, the boy who came in to report on lies about the success of BT Bengan is a Mr. Mark Linus,
Yes.
who works for Mr. Bill Gates.
Yes.
Mr. Linus has been appointed in the Cornell Alliance of Science as their communication person. He gets cover news in New York Times, Guardian, and if you read our report, and it's a book called Philanthrocapitalism, the Gates to the Gates to the Global Empire. Farida's piece is there about the GM Bengan, but the control over the media, that's all shown. The big media is run by Mr. Gates. And Mr. Mark Linus, with another environmentalist in England, Mr. George Monbiot, have just launched a campaign for fake food. The only way to save the world is to eat fake food. And they call it reboot food. And the heart of it is this sudden group that came out in Stockholm called EAT. I was invited for the inaugural meeting, and I could smell immediately that they're going to not play a good role. And with Lancet, EAT Lancet is pushing fake food. So Mr. Linus, Farida knows him well, and that's the reason the media just doesn't ever report the truth. And meetings like this become very important to know what's going on in Brazil and Mexico and the rest of the world.
Thank you. Thank you, Farida and Vandana. Vivek, some closing thoughts from you?
Okay, can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear.
Well, what I would just like to say here is one example to the African friend. Some years back, I was working on a sustainability project, agriculture sustainability project in the Limpopo floodplains. So we did all the work, we did everything, and since I was there, organic farming, etc., no to GMOs. Somewhat a week down the line, we had a one line email which was shown to me, and the funders said, if you are not agreeing to GMOs, then we are backing out the entire funding for this project. Simple. And that was the Bill Gates Foundation. So where the money is, there's control, I guess. So why I want to say this is that at so many levels we need to fight. We need to, as Vandana just said, that these meetings are very important. But we need to, I think, on this issue, especially now, to get a whole lot of togetherness. Unfortunately, as I said earlier, I'm finding civil society is all nowhere near any kind of cohesion that we had during the BT Brinjal affair. We all need to work on that. It's huge, this issue. And as Leo keeps saying, I'm a cynic. That's true, but I also have to get out of my lethargy and my cynicism, as I think a lot of us do, to hope that something good will come out of all our effort. That's all I want to say. Thank you. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Vivek.
Thank you.
Anil ji?
Okay. First, two things. One, I forgot to mention Aruna Rodrigues' name, from whom I get so many inputs regarding this. And second thing, like I'm unhappy that today we don't have amongst our midst people like farmer leaders like Nanjunda Swami, who could mobilize people against this particular issue. That's all. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, thank you. Yeah, Aruna, over to you.
I think I finally have something to say. What are we going to do about the conflict of interest? BBC is funded quite to a large extent by Bill Gates. I don't know how much of that is known to everybody. The DBT funds Pentel, the mustard developer. Our own government is in a tremendous conflict of interest with Monsanto Bayer. So I think this is at the source and at the heart of what we are not able to, pile up against. What Vivek says, I'm not sure how to fight this. We don't seem to be able to fight it in court either. The Supreme Court, lower courts don't seem to think it's important. But if you are funded by the very people that are developing the products that they are regulating, then we have no hope. And that's the point I want to make, really.
Thank you. Karine, would you like to say something as closing thoughts?
Yes, sure. Well, first of all, thank you to everyone. This was very informative for me, listening to you. These, as someone mentioned, I may need to write another book, and I hope it's one with a happy ending. And I just want to mention, there's one thing I would like to mention. Some of you may know, I'm sure, but the UN General Assembly adopted in 2018 the UN Declaration on the Rights of Peasants and Other People working in rural areas. And one important contribution of this declaration is that for the first time we have an international legal instrument that says that something that should be obvious but wasn't, that the rights of peasants must prevail over intellectual property rights and the private commercial rights of companies. So I invite you, if you haven't, to look at the declaration. And also I wanted to mention that civil society has launched just yesterday a new website to promote the declaration. I sent the link to the website in the chat. And one of the things that we want to use the website for is to document case law in which cases before the courts in which the UN Declaration is used as an argument in defense of the rights of peasants and including the rights to seeds. So yeah, thank you to everyone and all the best.
Thank you. Thank you so much for agreeing to talk and giving your time. And thanks to all our speakers. And before we close, over to Leo.
Thank you, Bhargavi, for conducting this so well. And thank you, Karine. Thank you, Aruna. Thank you, Vandana. Thank you, Farida ji. Thank you, Vivek. And thank you, Anil ji. A couple of you said that there is the chances of hope are faint, but I must say that, Jagadishan was a managing director of Monsanto India. And during the last public hearing that Jairam Ramesh held in Brinjal in Bangalore, he was right in the front and opposing the release of GMOs. And he said, and I recall, that, I know how terrible this company is. And that is why, though I've spent a long time of my career working for it, now I'm dead opposed to it. And he kept in touch with us. I don't know how he is doing because I haven't heard from him recently. But then in that same public hearing, we had Professor U.R. Ananthamurthy, who came straight from his dialysis. At that time, he was going through dialysis. And when I asked him if he would come for the public hearing, he came straight from the dialysis. So that's the commitment he showed. But the more amazing thing of that public hearing was Shri Devegowda ji turned up, because the Vivek, Julie, Bhargavi and I went to talk to him, and we asked him, sir, will you come tomorrow? He said, no, Donna. But the next day, when we were sitting in the public hearing, Devegowda ji walked in as an ordinary person, a former prime minister. I've never seen humility like that. Of course, we don't have politicians like them filling the parliament so much, except a rare exception like Anil ji. But then I think, should that mean we give up hope? I really don't think so, because the person, one of the other persons who was participating here is a scientist who worked in Monsanto. And if I'm not mistaken, he was part of the lab which actually did BT Brinjal. Today, he is heading the School of Natural Farming. And he is training thousands and thousands of farmers across Karnataka and the rest of India in terms of how to get out of the rut that green revolution, post-green revolution, BT, this and that has got us into. And whenever I've been to the workshops he conducts, it's just overflowing with enthusiasm from farmers who are fed up with the system. Now, I think what Manjunath has shown us, and of course, people like Vandana have been doing it for a long time, but what Manjunath has shown up is that there is a method in which you can converse with farmers, and farmers are willing to listen. But there's going to be a strike very soon in Tumkur district, because the cost of coconut and arecanut has fallen so bad that the farmers don't know what to do with that, with their harvest. And so they're going to call the entire districts Bandh. We have seen how the farm protest took place. I mean, the farm bills were modeled on what was called the zero budget natural farming that Azim Premji Foundation and Andhra Pradesh government promoted, with support from Bill and Melinda Gates Fund, with Bill Gates particularly sponsoring Digital Green, World Agroforestry Fund, UNEP, and so on. So there is a compound of UN agencies, corporate bodies, and funding agencies which want to monetize, which want to corporatize, which want to genetically modify and take control of seeds. So if seed activism has survived all these decades and centuries, and I'm saying centuries because we didn't have a word for it, but when people cultivated seeds and did not allow the idea of commodifying it to pervade society, I think they're basically being very, very clear that life cannot be commodified. So I think the point is that when people like Manjunath are there, there's a lot of hope, because they're actually spreading the word against the trend of the state and the corporate nexus and the financial agencies which back them. But there is a job that several of us who can't be doing that must do. And that is, I think, to get into the fact that the ESG case, for instance, is not just about biodiversity, biopiracy. It's actually about securing the structures of power are accountable to people. That if there is an authority like the NBA, they better work, and we should make them work. If you see the NBA, before we filed the PIL, they did nothing. Bhargavi will tell you how she discovered that one of their meetings was minuted, in which they discussed if one of the members would be reimbursed the cost of his dentures. I don't know what words to use, but I'm aghast that is how our monies are being used by regulatory agencies like that. Good news is this: Mr. Rachalendra Reddy, who 10 years ago was the member secretary of NBA and who is the lead petitioner who charged Monsanto, Maiko, Tamil Nadu Agriculture University Vice Chancellor, UAS Dharwad Vice Chancellor, and Vegetable Research Vice Chancellor on grounds of biopiracy and filed a criminal complaint in Dharwad court, has been appointed as chairman of the National Biodiversity Authority. I wanted him here today, but he's in Montreal. He couldn't come. He's there in the COP. So obviously, I think he has to live up to the fact that he filed that complaint and he has to fight against it. So there's a lot of work to be done. And this work is not necessarily a local effort in the sense of a country, but it requires, because genetic purity and genetic seed sovereignty are essentially global. While they are locally held and locally sovereign, their protection has to be a global effort. So I think that's basically what we have achieved today. And I think every presentation has spoken to that need. And I thank each and every one of you for making time. It's been a little longer than we expected, but I think that half an hour we spent extra was worth it. I want to say that this is being recorded. The recording will be available tomorrow. Please share it widely. I thank my colleagues, Amrita, Varun, Nidhi, Sachin, and two of our interns who are working with us. Samyukta and this is one who just joined yesterday. I can't get her name, but she knows who I'm talking about. They have tweet reported it. I will share the tweet reporting, and we'll also put out a proper report of this maybe by tomorrow, along with the video recording. Please consider sharing this, and I hope we can have more conversation to build on this platform. And yeah, let's also hold hands with Mr. Aneel Hegde inside Parliament and make sure that we pressurize all our parliamentarians to speak wisdom in a forum which really matters to us. So thank you very much, and
Thank you.
have a good night, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks to everyone. Bye-bye.
Goodbye.
Good night.
Thank you. Thank you.
Right. Thank you. Good night and good morning. Thank you.
Night. Good morning.
How do I turn this off, Leo?
Just leave.
Leave.
No, Leo, how do I leave?
Okay. We'll close it. Don't worry.
All right.
Everybody leaves. Yeah.
Good night.
Right. Thank you. Thank you, Anilji.
Talk to you later.
Thank you. Thank you.
Bye, Anil. Bye, Bhargavi.
Bye.
Bye, Vivek. Thanks a lot.
Pleasure.
Say hi to Julie and the kids.
I will. All the best to you too.
Thank you.
Cheers.